All right, good morning, Dealey Montessori. Thank you very much for coming to the Sixth Floor Museum and taking part in our special Living History series that we do every so often. And my name is Stephen Fagin. I'm the curator here at the museum, and it's always a great pleasure to do these programs. It's a part of our oral history project at the museum where we invite a special guest who lived the experience of the Kennedy assassination. We invite them here to come and share their story and show you some photographs and really experience history in a new and exciting way. And our guest today is a very special friend of this museum. This is Dr. Phillip Williams. And back in 1963, he was an intern at Parkland Memorial Hospital. Today, he's a very well-respected neurosurgeon in Dallas, but he was an intern at Parkland back in 1963, and he was there the weekend of the assassination and witnessed in the emergency room the President Kennedy's arrival and was involved in the surgery of Lee Harvey Oswald. So we're going to hear a lot of interesting stories today. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Williams to share his memories with us. Dr. Williams, we always start these programs by giving our guests a glimpse of who you were back 50 years ago, and there you are. This is you in the 1960s.
Wish I had that hair back.
You actually haven't changed that much. No, not at all. Before we get to our Parkland story from the weekend of the assassination, you actually had the chance to see President Kennedy in New Orleans earlier that year. Tell us about that.
Well, let me give you a quick little my educational background. I went to Preston Hollow Grade School, then Hillcrest High School, and then SMU for my pre-med, and then down to Tulane in New Orleans for my medical school. And I graduated in 1963. And in June of 1963, just prior to our graduation, President Kennedy came to New Orleans. So I got to see him. And he gave a talk right in front of our medical school complex. And that was exciting, but little did I know that 5 or 6 months later, it'd be a different story when we were all together. So that's when I really first had contact with the president, was just right at my graduation time from Tulane Medical School.
Did President Kennedy look the same in person as he looked on television?
Oh, yes. Dynamic, very alive and vigorous. And he was a very inspiring speaker as well, as most of us know.
Now, you arrived at Parkland in July of 1963, is that correct?
July 1st. That's the day that people who graduated from medical school started an internship or residency, and or then it's also the date that those who've completed that internship and residency move on to another level of training or private practice.
And now, I mentioned earlier you were an intern at Parkland. Give us an idea of what an intern would do in the emergency room, for example.
Intern is, I guess, for lack of a better expression, the little man on the totem pole. But we were right out of medical school as interns. And in the emergency room, we would see the patients as they came in, and then we would evaluate them and do a history and a physical examination, order some blood work, maybe some x-rays. And then once we had that information back, we'd go to our resident who was overseeing our activity. And we'd go over the case and make a decision on what type of treatment the patient would require.
Now, in November of '63, when it was announced that President Kennedy was going to be coming to Dallas as part of his Texas visit, Dallas was a pretty conservative city, was and still is, and Kennedy was not particularly popular here. Do you remember having any concerns about the president's safety? Did you think he might be brought to Parkland if there was a problem?
Well, certainly if there was a problem, that's where he would be brought. And I might say to anybody that ever has any major trauma, Parkland is where you want to go in most cases for trauma. The other hospitals have trauma units too, but yes, we were concerned. There was a lot of anxiety about the president. There had been some episodes with Vice President Johnson when he had been here, and Adlai Stevenson. There's just a number of things. There were bumper stickers that were around said "Kennedy for King, Goldwater for President," and so there was a lot of uptight, that you might say, but we were excited, and so many people took off work to have an opportunity to see the president when he landed at Love Field and coming in from Fort Worth, and then when he went down, the downtown on his way over here.
There was a sign that referenced the president's brother, Bobby Kennedy. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, this was down in the emergency room, and what we had in the emergency room is a little nurses station. Not little nurses, but big nurses too. And we had a room where we would write out orders, write out prescriptions, and write out appointment slips back to the clinic. And at that time in the United States, President Kennedy and his brother Bobby, who's the Attorney General, were dealing with U.S. Steel and having some issues with some of the big corporations. And one of the things that Mr. Fagin was talking about, there was a sign up in the emergency room that says, first let me say this. A box was a little cardboard box was put up. They put appointment slips and prescription blanks, so it's all be together, not spread out everywhere. And someone put up a sign up there: "Do not remove, or I'll call Bobby." Signed JFK. And this was up there for about 2 or 3 months before the president ever came into the emergency room. And obviously that was of concern to those who might have put it up. But anyway, it was a sign that was in the nurses' station for about 2 or 3 months before the Kennedy came.
Was it still up there on the day of the assassination?
Oh, it was.
My goodness, that's an interesting little anecdote.
It's no longer there now.
Of course, as the motorcade made its way through downtown Dallas, as it reached Dealey Plaza right outside this building here, shots were fired, and within about 5 minutes, the motorcade arrived at the emergency entrance to Parkland Hospital. I want to show you guys an interesting artifact from our collection. This is the registration of patients for November 22nd, 1963. If you guys have ever been to the hospital, if you've ever had to go to the emergency room, you know they always log you in. They always register you and the time you came in. So if you look at those two arrows up there, you'll see second line, 1238, John F. Kennedy, and he's being treated for GSW, which stands for gunshot wound. And you can follow it along there where it shows that he expired, he passed away. And then a little further down on the list, 1240, the governor of Texas, John Connally. I love an artifact like this because it really shows you that Parkland was a busy major trauma center, and President Kennedy and the governor of Texas, John Connally, were just two of many, many patients being treated on this particular day. Dr. Williams, you were there. You were upstairs. Tell us your story, how you found out.
Can we go back to the previous picture?
That is the entrance there.
Okay, that's the entrance. Let's see if I can get our magic marker here. This is, of course, the entrance for the emergency room, and just above that was a room, which was a conference room, and we were having a medicine conference room that particular day. Normally on Fridays, knowing that I wanted to go into surgery, I would go down to the emergency room and sew people up that came in. So at the time he first came in, when the president came in, I was upstairs because I was presenting a case to one of the professors. And we started hearing pages, Dr. Kemp Clark, stat, Dr. Tom Shires, stat, and these were professors, and they were not ones that would be called for an emergency until they'd been seen by an intern or resident. But they were calling all these doctors as an emergency. Does anybody know what the emergency word is if they need somebody quickly? Stat, S-T-A-T, stat. And that's going to be on your quiz, so be sure and remember that. Anyway, so they were calling Dr. Shires stat and Dr. Kemp Clark stat. Dr. Clark is the one who I trained under in neurosurgery and for the next 4 years. But that was unusual. So then one of the professors came to the door and said, "Kennedy and Connally are downstairs shot." Well, they didn't believe. The folks in the conference room didn't believe that. And he says, "I'm serious. Kennedy and Connally are downstairs shot." So all the big shots, the professors and the chief residents all went down on the elevator, which was just outside the door of this conference room. I went down the back steps, and I soon was right in front of Trauma Room 1 and with Miss Kennedy standing there. Now, let me see if I can get this.
We're looking at a picture of the hallway there in the emergency room.
This is the hallway, and when I came down through this door, Miss Kennedy was standing right there. Of course, she had that dress on with blood and brain and everything else. And I got her a chair to sit down and asked her if I could get her some water or something of that nature, and she says no. In my opinion, she was very composed. They have to be prepared for something like this. Tragically, they do, but she was very composed because she was really in control of what was going to go on. But
inside, we're gonna go up to that door now. There's a close-up of the doorway, trauma room number 1, and of course, when you got down there, the door was open. What did you see inside the room?
Well, just a lot of people. Of course, the president was on a gurney, and here's a picture of the room itself. I can turn around. This is not a very big room. I should know the dimensions of it, but it was not a very big room, and it was fairly compact. But there were about 20 people in there, all the professors that had come down from different areas. This is the gurney that the president was on, and this is the suction machine. I think I can see it, and we had a respirator machine.
I can move the...
Can you?
This is the other side of the room there. It really gives you a sense of how small the room is from one side to the other. That's a suction machine?
That's a suction machine, and that is if they were to aspirate or have saliva or fluids coming out their mouth, they would suction it out so it would make an airway possible.
So did you actually see President Kennedy?
I physically did not see him. I was standing right outside the door, and being an intern and everybody else in there were the chiefs and the residents. I needed to be where I needed to be, and I was doing my job taking care of Ms. Kennedy until they brought her into the trauma room 1. But
was she alone in that hallway, or were there Secret Service?
No, the Secret Service were inside the trauma room 1.
So she had kind of been left on her own.
Yeah, she's there by herself, and that's when I approached her and asked if I could be of help.
Mm. And you got a chair for her?
I did. It's just one of these old metal chairs, a lot older than what these are. But it was just a folded metal chair, but I offered her something to drink, but she very calm and collected. Mm. People think she was in shock. I personally don't think she was. Like I said, I think she's been prepared for this or was prepared for it.
Now, meanwhile, while this is happening, outside, dignitaries from the motorcade, law enforcement, bystanders, people that had been in the emergency room that were sent outside, they're all just sort of gathering outside the hospital in a picture like what we see here. And then when word came that President Kennedy had died, you see reactions like these two ladies, just grief across the face of the world. But it began right there as word got out from Parkland that the president was dead. When did you learn, how did you learn that the president had died?
Well, as I was standing there, we, of course, word was right away that he died. He didn't stay there very long. He came, a lot of people think he was dead when he arrived at Parkland. He was alive, what we call just vegetative state. He had breathing mechanism. His breathing was going on, but he did not have any consciousness at all. And of course, the right side of his head had been blasted away with a bullet shot. But he had these what we call agonal respiration for about 5 minutes, and then and they did a closed heart massage when his heart stopped, and tried to do what they could. Did a tracheostomy, which is an opening in the neck. And that'll be on your quiz too. And once it was obvious that he couldn't survive, I don't think he couldn't, even if he were in better shape, he couldn't have survived because of the damage to the brain and to his head.
Now, as a neurosurgeon now, with all the equipment and technology available today in 2016, if something like this were to happen, would there be a chance of saving the president?
Not like this type of injury he had. Or his brother Bobby had the same type, had a head injury when he was assassinated. No, modern, we got kidney transplants and heart transplants, but I think it'll be a long time before we have any brain transplants. I know we probably need some, but we don't think modern medicine will take us that far.
Now, there's quite a bit of controversy over the removal of the president's body from Parkland that day. It was by state law he should have legally received his autopsy in the state of Texas, but the Secret Service had other ideas.
That's correct, and I was standing there and I watched that. But first, let me just say that Once he was declared dead, one of the head nurse in the trauma room 1 opened the door and asked me to go get a mattress cover off of one of the beds upstairs on the second floor, on the fourth floor, I believe, which is a cover of one of the hospital beds, which I did. We didn't have body bags back in those days, and you've seen pictures on television where they brought someone out of a room or a house in a body bag. We didn't have those, and so I did get this mattress cover, and I brought it back down. By that time, the priest had come in from Holy Trinity, Father Huber, and Mrs. Kennedy did not want him pronounced dead until he'd been given the last rites by the Catholic priest. So once the body bag, and they gave him the last rites, he was put in this body bag, or mattress cover in this case, and placed in a casket that had come in from O'Neill Funeral Home. And they put him in a casket, and then they closed the casket and started to push him out the door. And Dr. Earl Rose, who was the medical examiner, I mean, he was the one that does all the autopsies on patients that come in through the hospital. He pushed the casket back into the room. He says, "You can't take this. This is a homicide. State law requires it be autopsy." They slammed him up against the wall, covered him up with Secret Service agents and FBI agents. And the FBI and Secret Service didn't know who was who. But anyway, they covered him up, and they went right out the door with the casket. And I walked right behind Mrs. Kennedy in the casket, and until they got out to the hearse that had come in with the casket. She had her hand on the top of the casket as she walked out. President Johnson had already gone out. He was in the building, in the area, but in a different room called minor medicine. One thing I might say to you, does anybody know when President Johnson became president? Yes, ma'am.
As soon as he was pronounced dead.
That's correct. That's correct. He had not been inaugurated or sworn in, but he was still the acting president of the United States and would make any decision involving the United States.
That's what the Constitution dictates, that immediate transfer of power when the president becomes incapacitated in any way. We'll do questions towards the end. There's still a lot more to talk about, though.
I just wanted to get that in because I thought that was an interesting point.
Now you're a young man.
That'll be on the quiz question, too.
This will be a long quiz. Now you're a young intern there, and literally world history is changing right in front of your eyes at Parkland Hospital. Are you, at this moment, sensing that this is a historic occasion?
In all honesty, probably not. I was just more concerned about what my role was, what was going on in the hospital. As I reflected on it in days and weeks and months and years to come, it made one of the major things that happened in this world history and on this planet. And we all can recognize that in all different ways. President Kennedy offered a lot to the presidency, I think, and he and his beautiful family were dynamic, and they brought life and activities to the White House. But it was a lot more than that. There was a great loss for this country and this world as it happened.
Let's talk for a moment about Governor Connolly, because just across that hallway from Trauma 1 was Trauma 2, and Governor Connolly was being treated in there, and he survived. Did you get a sense of what was going on in there as well?
I did. I actually poked my head in the room while they were doing the surgery. He was up in the operating room. He did go from the emergency room where he was attended by Dr. Jimmy Red Duke. I don't know if any of y'all recognize that name, but he was a Parkland resident. He took care of he took care of Governor Connolly. But the governor was taken upstairs where they did a chest operation on him. And I had the opportunity to take the family into the recovery room once Governor Connolly came in out of the operating room into the recovery room. I took the family and all Mrs. Connolly and all the children in to see him for the first time after he'd been shot. And then we got to be friends with the governor, Ms. Connolly, and I remember we went to President Reagan's inauguration, and Governor Connolly was there, and we were walking up to the Capitol for the inauguration, and I had a little book I carried around with me to collect autographs. It was kind of fun. And of course, I saw him, and I got his autograph, and got Miss Connolly's autograph, and she reached up and kissed the book. So I've got this little book with her lipstick on it. But they were wonderful people, and of course, I'm very sad that this injury that he received ultimately took his life years later.
Yeah, he lived about 30 years after the assassination. But what you may not know is that Governor Connolly actually recovered at Parkland Hospital for several days, and they set up a temporary office of the governor.
That's right.
Did you go up there when he was conducting state business?
Well, I'm not sure if it was state business, but I did go up there to say hello to him and Miss Connolly. And I've become friends with his son, Mark Connolly, here in Dallas. Mm-hmm. He wrote a letter, and C.J. Price, who was administrator of the hospital, wrote a letter to point out all the things Parkland Hospital represented in the world at that time. Mm-hmm. And right. Of course, you have that. Dallas is an important city in the world, and always has been, always will be. And you all living in Dallas, I'm of course putting a plug in for Dallas now, but it's the greatest city in this state. It's the greatest state in this union. So you all take pride in this city.
Your story with the Kennedy assassination does not end on November 22nd, because on Sunday, Lee Harvey Oswald is shot while in police custody. You saw the pictures downstairs, shot by Jack Ruby, a local nightclub owner, and he too goes to Parkland for treatment. So let's take a look at the registration of patients 2 days later, and you see the arrow at the very bottom of the screen there, Lee Harvey Oswald coming into the hospital, and again, it's for GSW, gunshot wound, and if you follow it along, it says expired during surgery, I believe it says. So again, another day, another busy day, and yet world history changes once again with the accused assassin of the president coming to the hospital. Now, you were at home at the time, right?
I'd just gotten home. I'd been at Parkland for about 72 straight hours, and I'd just come home and turned on the television. Just as I started watching television, I saw the actual shooting of the president, of Oswald being shot by Ruby. And I picked up the phone, and I knew the back line number, and I called the emergency room, and I said, "You won't believe this." I remember saying that. He said, "You won't believe this, but Oswald just been shot." Well, we knew he was going to be coming to Parkland, and so I alerted them, and they were all prepared for Oswald when he arrived. And he was brought in on a gurney that was provided down at the city hall by the ambulance, and he was operated on that gurney. He didn't even give him time to move him over to an operating bed. And they operated on, I think it was about an hour and a half before he just ran out of blood. I was in the operating room. I put the EKG leads on his body at the time he came into the operating room, and then we pumped about 19 units of blood, but he died in shock with blood loss. It just couldn't be controlled. And I've often said that if you'll remember that picture that was taken by the Dallas Times-Herald, where Oswald was coming at an angle. Oswald was walking out, and Ruby was coming at an angle and shot him. And I said, "That's the way the mafia takes you out." I'm not sure if that's true or not, but it's fun to think about it. But you think really it would get more organs by an angle shot like that. But he didn't survive, and this is a picture here of the police taking the Oswald's body down to the morgue.
Yeah, you can see the sheet's been pulled up. This is after his surgery. Now, going back to Oswald's surgery for a minute, there's a couple things that you observed in there that I want to ask you about. One is a controversial phone call from President Johnson. Tell us about that.
Yes, and that's not well known, but President Johnson called up to the emergency room to see if Oswald had made a statement. And this has been verified by several of the nurses, too, one of which took the call. He wanted to speak to the surgeon, which at that time was Dr. Shires, chief of surgery. And Dr. Shires said he was busy. He didn't have time to talk to the president. But that did occur. which was a little unusual, but President Johnson wanted to know if a statement had been made by Oswald. But he was unconscious from the time he was shot at the City Hall, and of course, it expired there on the table in the operating room.
And there was also an issue with the clock. Tell us about that.
Well, this I can't really verify, but I remember that there was about a 20 minutes that were off on the clock from what the actual time was. And that's something I've just always remembered, but not a big deal, I guess.
So the time of Oswald's death, which is in all the documents, may be about 20 minutes later than his actual time of expiration.
That's correct.
That's very interesting.
From what I remember seeing the clock on the wall.
Now, after this long weekend is over, you were there when the president died. The governor was treated, underwent surgery. The accused assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, you were in surgery with him when he died. I can't imagine the impact this would have had on your life. I know you have gone around the country and around the world and done talks about November 22nd. How do people react when they find out that you were sort of at ground zero during this incredibly historic weekend?
Well, they've reacted differently. I might say, Stephen, I had my first date with my wife, who was here in the audience, Bobby Sue. She wasn't all that impressed, which is really not true. She was in class at the University of Dallas. It's a Catholic school, and she's got a good story to tell about what happened at University of Dallas, and they closed all the classes. But in answer to your original question on that, the people were. I was at the right place at the right time in American history, and that's the thing I want to get over to you all. This is an important event, not only in medical history, neurosurgical history, but it's Dallas history, Texas history, American history, and the world. It occurred right here in this building that you're sitting in. And people just react, of course, amazed, and it comes up all the time that people will ask me about it, and I just say it was just another day at work.
Now, as a neurosurgeon, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about the controversy over the president's head wound, because there are, of course, as you well know, people who believe the shot came from this building, others who believe the shot came from the grassy knoll area outside, which is extremely important because it determines whether or not there was a conspiracy, a second gunman firing at the president that day. I know you've seen autopsy pictures, x-rays, doctors' statements. You've probably talked with many of the doctors. What's your assessment of the head shot and where it originated?
Well, the subsequent pictures that we've seen, and they're on YouTube, I think, of the autopsy.
We're not telling you to go out and look at autopsy pictures, though.
No, not at all. But from the ones that actually participated in his treatment in the emergency room, trauma room 1, it wasn't as devastating an injury as what subsequent pictures were. It was a major injury, and part of his brain was exposed when he was on the emergency room table. But I don't think we'll ever have an answer. There are several doctors that were actually there who had a strong feeling that it was, not just one shot, too. And they thought there was a bullet hole. One of the doctors thought that someone had attempted a tracheostomy, which in fact it was a bullet wound. But I don't think the real answer, I personally don't think we'll ever know in our lifetime what exactly happened.
Do you take a position just in the entire story as whether you believe in a conspiracy?
Well, they have a lot of interesting points, but just like this presidential election we've got going on, you don't know who to believe, and and that makes it even more difficult for making decisions. But I'm not going to say I believe in a conspiracy, but I kind of tend to believe it, just like Lee Harvey Oswald said. He said, I was just a patsy. I think he certainly participated, but why he did, I don't know.
We're looking at a picture here. We're kind of revisiting that early photograph, the door to trauma room number 1, where President Kennedy died. And as you can see, a wreath has been placed on the door. And in fact, as I understand it, Parkland would place a wreath on the anniversary of the assassination each year. And this next picture right here, we see another wreath being placed on the door. This is a picture taken from inside the room looking out. How did the assassination impact Parkland? Did it have a day-to-day impact?
Well, it did, because everything, we were the focus of the world, and we just continued to work as the sign-ins sheet showed. We had a lot of people, and we had to take care of those who were coming in. And yet, of course, Dallas, and I don't know, and I guess Parkland too, was subject to a lot of criticism. I think, that a lot of people think that we should have been able to save them, but, they don't know the real facts. And we just did the best we can, as you do in everything, and you do in life. You just do the best you can. And we did. We're a good hospital, a great hospital. Let me just point out, here, you can see this is a nurse, obviously. They don't wear caps like that. Now you can't tell who the nurses or doctors are anymore. I wish the nurses wore those caps again.
Well, between the two of us, they know which one the doctor is.
Oh, so. Yeah.
I want to give you guys a chance to ask Dr. Williams some questions. As I mentioned earlier, this is being recorded, so I'll repeat your questions just so we can get it on the mic. But just raise your hand. We'll take as many as we can, and you can ask him about his experiences. Yes? Did you hear the gunshots?
Oh, did I? No, I was at Parkland Hospital. Gunshots were downtown.
Yeah, about 5 minutes away, so it'd been difficult. Yeah, right there on the end.
Did this traumatize you in any way or change your career, medical?
Did it traumatize you or change your career?
That's a good question. No, it encouraged me even more to be involved in neurosurgery. I was still an intern, but I was planning to go in neurosurgery, and I was certainly more enthusiastic. Well, I've always been enthusiastic about it. I had a lot of mentors in neurosurgery.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
How old were you at this?
How old were you in 1963?
Would you ask a woman that? But I was 23.
23. All right. Back there in the glasses, yes.
Did this affect any of the votes that
I can't hear him.
Did it affect any of the what?
the votes?
The votes?
Yes. Did
It-
when John F. Kennedy died, did his competitor the election?
Oh, I see. Yeah, it's very, very
That's a good
interesting question, asking if it affected the election in 64.
Well, I don't think there's any question about it. He was up for re-election in 1964. And as I mentioned, there was a bumper sticker, Kennedy for King, Goldwater for President. And Barry Goldwater was a very conservative senator from Arizona. But obviously President Johnson had succeeded President Kennedy, and Johnson was running for his own term. And it was a landslide for Johnson. So, yes, I think and it was a sympathetic vote for a lot of people, too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's take this question over here.
When you first heard the president had been shot, how did you feel? Were you surprised?
Well, first, as I mentioned, we didn't believe the person that was making the announcement to us. And then when he repeated it and emphatically he says Kennedy and Connally are downstairs shot, yes, I believed it, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, but until I was involved in it like I was. Yeah. But it was a devastating message.
Yes, ma'am.
Why did you try to save Oswald if he was already going to be executed?
Oh, that's a good question. Why did you try to save Oswald?
Good question. As doctors, we try to take care of everybody, no matter what their background is. There's been a lot of gangsters and things that have come in through the emergency room that we all have an obligation, a moral obligation, Hippocratic oath obligation to take care of them. It was very important and that's perhaps one of the reasons that President Johnson made an inquiry about whether he was making a statement or not. But it was important that he be saved, not necessarily that he'd be executed in time, but there was a lot of information that he had that would be important to this country. Yeah.
Imagine if Oswald had lived, what answers we may have about the Kennedy assassination.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah. I want to grab a question over here on this end. Yes, ma'am.
What did you say you were doing when John F. Kennedy was brought into Parkland?
I was in a room upstairs. As I mentioned, normally I would go to the emergency room on Friday afternoons, and instead of going for my lunch, I'd go down and sew people up. But this particular Friday, we had a medicine conference with Dr. Don Selden, and you never wanted to miss a medicine conference with Dr. Selden. He's about 94 years old now and still holding conferences. But,
wow.
So I was there, but it was one of my patients that was being presented to Dr. Selden, and so it was best that I be there. But as soon as we heard this information, we all went down to the emergency room, the floor below.
Yes, ma'am.
When you were operating on Oswald, how many other people were in the room? What part?
How many people were in Oswald
That's a
surgery?
good question. Well, I wasn't operating on him. I was an intern. I put the EKG leads onto him, and I did put put blood in his right leg, but he had a lot of blood loss. But there were probably about, I'd be a guess. I've never thought about it, but there were a good number of people in the room. But there were FBI, our Secret Service in the room too. And one of our doctors had his camera and was taking pictures, and the Secret Service confiscated the camera.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know how many actual people. You know, there's anesthesiologists. There's Dr. Shires, Dr. Ron Jones, who gives a lot of presentations down here, and Dr. Dale Kahn. There's just a number of them that were in the room.
Yes, ma'am. Were you surprised to meet Mrs. Kennedy, to see her there in the hallway?
Well, absolutely.
I imagine.
I didn't, of course, that's how I got down the emergency room. I didn't wait for the elevator like everybody else did. I knew the back way steps, and so that's how I got down there before anyone else.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do you think the doctors worked as hard on Oswald as they worked?
Oh, absolutely.
Question was, do you think the doctors worked as hard on Oswald as Kennedy?
That's a good question. Absolutely. They did. They didn't have any reason not to work as hard as they would if the president or anybody for that matter. But it was just a bad injury, a bad wound, and just one shot, but it hit a lot of organs, and all which were very vascular.
Mm-hmm. Yes, back there.
Do you think that there were multiple assassinations that happened?
We talked a little bit about that earlier. Do you think there was a conspiracy?
I can't say.
You're sort of undecided for the most part, although you seem to lean towards
there's a
one.
lot of evidence against that, and yet there's a lot of people bringing different things up. Every day you get something different. And this will be our lifetime interest in this, just like that with President Lincoln.
Yeah.
And that's another quiz question. Do y'all know what other presidents have been assassinated?
I do.
I'm going to let your teacher ask you that, but I asked that young man over there, do you know?
Abraham Lincoln.
No, which other ones? There were 4 assassinated presidents.
You said which president?
Lincoln and Kennedy, and there are 2 others.
Full disclosure, that's your grandson. So.
That's right. Exactly.
Does anybody know, other than Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy, who was assassinated? Yes. Garfield, absolutely. And one more. Do you know? Over here? Yes, ma'am. No, he
attempted assassination.
Yeah, he was shot and very seriously wounded, but he did not die. Yeah. William McKinley.
That's
James
correct.
A. Garfield, William McKinley. Very good. That's excellent. We have time for about 2 more questions today. Yes, ma'am.
Did you ever speak to Mrs. Kennedy later on?
Oh,
No.
good question. Did you ever talk to Mrs. Kennedy later?
No, I did not. No, she when she left where I was with her, she went into the trauma room, and that's where she had told the doctors in there that she wanted him to have the last riots before they pronounced him dead, and then that's when she took her ring off and put it on his finger.
But later in life, you never met her again before she passed away in the 90s?
No, I
Okay.
did not.
One interesting fact before we take our last
33
question.
Wasn't she 33 years old?
At the time?
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that.
She's
early
about 30.
30s.
Beautiful
Yeah.
woman. Beautiful woman.
President Kennedy was the first president you saw in person, but as I understand it, you have seen or met every president since then?
Yes, that's correct. Actually, every president since Harry Truman.
Wow.
I saw Harry Truman. I even saw Hoover, actually, but
Oh,
I never did
Hoover.
see Roosevelt.
But Kennedy was your first one.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. All right, we'll take one more question. This young man right here.
Do you think it would have greatly affected our knowledge of the assassination if Oswald could still be alive today?
Do you think it would have affected our knowledge of the assassination had Lee Harvey Oswald lived? We talked a little bit about that a moment ago.
Well, I think it was important that he be treated and hopefully would have survived the injury so that he could tell us who he was involved with. You know, he lived in Russia at one time, and he married a Russian woman. So it was important that we have as much information as possible. That was a bad loss too, with the loss of Oswald, but certainly not the loss like was President Kennedy.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for being here. It's always a great opportunity when we're able to bring to life the moment and the memory of the Kennedy assassination by having a participant here to share their story. Please join me in thanking Dr. Williams for being here today.